Have you ever heard a story so unbelievable, so gut-wrenchingly human, that it almost feels like it can't be real? And yet it tells a truth about life that we all secretly recognize? Here's one. In the wealthiest country on earth, over 550,000 Americans sleep in shelters, cars, or places not meant for living, while entire buildings sit abandoned, locked away, hiding secrets no one has dared to touch for decades. And today, we're stepping into one of those secrets. Because buried inside a collapsing hotel in a dying Rust Belt town, a woman, broken by life, forgotten by the system, and fighting just to keep her sick child alive, stumbled onto something that should have never been lost, something powerful enough to rewrite both her past and her future. But before we dive in, I want you to imagine this. What would you do if the universe handed you a choice that could lift you out of poverty forever? But doing the right thing meant walking away from everything you've ever dreamed of. Would you take the money or the truth? If stories like this move you, stories about courage, justice, and ordinary people standing at impossible crossroads, make sure you hit subscribe, because the journey you're about to take is one you'll never forget. All right, take a breath. Let's step inside the place where it all began. Some people say rock bottom is a single moment. One bad decision, one wrong turn, one terrible day. But for Lina Morales, rock bottom wasn't a moment at all. It was a slow collapse, the kind that steals years from a person until they barely recognize the face staring back at them in a cracked motel mirror. And on that cold March morning in Ohio, Lina looked exactly like someone the world had forgotten. She was 33, but life had carved lines into her that didn't belong on a woman her age. Growing up in foster care had taught her how to survive but not how to rest. Abuse had taught her how to hide bruises but not how to heal. And poverty, persistent, generational, suffocating poverty, had taught her the painful math of American life. When you're poor, everything costs more, even hope. Now she stood at the edge of the motel bed where she and her son, Eli, slept side by side beneath a buzzing neon vacancy sign. The kind of place that charged by the week and attracted people who didn't want to be found. Mold crept along the walls. The air smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. Every breath made Eli cough, and when he coughed too hard, his asthma monitor beeped like a warning she could never escape. The medication that worked best cost more than she made in 2 shifts at the diner. She glanced at the stack of bills in her hand. $5,909. Everything she had saved across 3 part-time jobs, plus a box of jewelry she pawned, her foster mother's earrings, a bracelet Eli made in 2nd grade, even the ring her ex had left behind when he disappeared along with his debts. It wasn't enough to buy stability, but maybe it was enough to buy a chance. The social worker had warned her that the motel wasn't safe for a chronically ill child. "Lina, you need a real address," as she said, "a place your son can breathe. As if homes grew on trees, as if people like Lina could simply afford to choose safety." Still, she listened. She always listened, and that's how she heard about the county tax default auction happening later that week. Buildings the city wanted to get rid of, properties no one had paid taxes on for years. Among them was a hulking, once grand Art Deco hotel on Riverside Drive, abandoned for nearly 4 decades, swallowed by weeds and local rumors. Some said a fire had taken out half the top floor. Others whispered about a missing owner, a police raid in the 80s, or a sealed-off penthouse no one could enter. To most people, it was a curse. To Lina, it was the only thing she could possibly afford. And so, standing in the doorway of that motel room, watching Eli pull his inhaler from beneath his pillow, she made a decision. A desperate, reckless, quietly heroic decision. She would go to that auction. She would take every dollar she had, and she would gamble her broken life on a broken building, because sometimes the only way out is through a door no one else dares to open. She squeezed Eli's hand and whispered, "Baby, I'm going to find us a home. Not a room. A home." And for the first time in months, he smiled. But Lina had no idea that what waited at that auction wasn't just a chance at shelter. It was the first step toward a secret hidden for 40 years. One powerful enough to rewrite everything she thought she knew about justice, history, and herself. The county courthouse didn't look like the kind of place where lives changed. It looked like the kind of place where dreams went to die quietly under fluorescent lights. And yet, on that gray Thursday morning, Lena Morales pushed through the heavy double doors with her shoulders squared and her entire future zipped into a worn canvas bag pressed against her chest. Inside were her savings, her receipts, and the last fragile thread of hope she had left. The auction room was half full, the kind of crowd you see at small-town events where everyone knows everyone else's business. Contractors with steel-toed boots, local landlords with too tight smiles, a couple of speculators from out of town hoping to flip a property for cheap. No one looked like Lena. No one looked like someone who biked to work in the rain because their car had died years ago. No one looked like someone who slept in a motel because they had run out of choices. The auctioneer, a tall man with a voice trained for state fairs and cattle shows, cleared his throat and slapped his palm against the podium. "Next item," he boomed, "the Riverside Grand Hotel, located on the corner of 5th and Riverside Drive. Opening bid starts at $10,000. $10,000. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had come hoping the rumors were true, that the city was practically begging someone to take the property off their hands. She'd heard whispers from a dishwasher at the diner that the hotel hadn't been legally occupied since 1984, that back taxes had piled up so long the county just wanted it gone. But 10,000 might as well have been 10 million. The room stayed silent. The auctioneer shifted, uncomfortable. "We'll accept 5,000 to start. 5,000. Do I hear 5?" Still nothing. The contractors stared at their phones. A landlord in a faded flannel shirt shook his head. Someone chuckled under their breath. Everyone in that room knew the truth. The Riverside Grand was a money pit, a structure the city had labeled at risk, a place filled with asbestos, rotting beams, and a legend about a sealed penthouse no one had seen in decades. No one wanted it. But Lena needed it. Her heart thudded. She lifted her hand, not all the way, just enough. 4,000, she said, her voice small but steady. The auctioneer blinked. "Ma'am, the minimum is 5. "That's all I have," she whispered, and the room turned to look at her, the way people look when they're not sure whether to pity you or warn you. She didn't flinch. She straightened her spine and said louder, 4,000. "Every dollar I've got. You want this hotel gone? I'll take it." A murmur rippled through the room. The city clerk leaned toward the auctioneer, shrugging, as if to say, "We both know no one else wants it anyway." The auctioneer sighed, tapping his pencil. 4,000. Going once. Lena swallowed hard. Eli's face flashed in her mind, his small chest rising and falling painfully through the night. Going twice. A long silence hung in the air like a held breath. "Sold." To the lady in the back. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through Lena's chest like thunder. She had done it. She had bought a hotel, the kind of building that once hosted wedding receptions and New Year's Eve dances, using nothing but desperation and a pocket full of wrinkled bills. The room buzzed with whispers. A landlord muttered, "Poor girl doesn't know what she just bought." A contractor laughed softly, "That place'll swallow her alive." But Lena barely heard them. She signed the papers with a hand that trembled between fear and wild, impossible hope. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where Eli had a real bedroom, where she didn't fight landlords for clean air or safe walls. But that future was still far away. And everything changed again just 2 hours later when she unlocked the front doors of the Riverside Grand for the first time and realized the building wasn't just abandoned, it was hiding something. The Riverside Grand didn't smell like history when Lena pushed the doors open for the first time. It smelled like mildew, rust, and dreams that had died slow, lonely deaths. The lobby was a forest of broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and dust so thick it looked like fog suspended in the air. Once, decades ago, this place had been a landmark. People dressed up for dinner here, took photographs on its marble staircase, danced under the gleam of a chandelier imported from Italy. Now the chandelier hung crooked, missing half its crystals, like a crown left on the skull of a fallen king. But somehow, Lena smiled, because for the first time in years, she had a roof no one could take away from her. She had keys. She had a front door that locked, and that alone felt like a miracle. She spent the first nights on the second floor, sleeping on a mattress she dragged from a cleaner room and laying a pile of blankets over Eli to keep the cold from tightening his chest. Every sound echoed, pipes clanking, raccoons scurrying across the attic, wind whistling through cracked windows, but it was still their place, their broken, echoing, impossible place. Day by day, the repairs began. Lena wasn't a contractor or an engineer. She was a waitress with cracked knuckles, a janitor with cheap tools, a mother who learned survival the hard way. But she watched YouTube tutorials by flashlight, pausing every few seconds to rewatch how to reset a breaker or patch a leaking pipe. She wore gloves until her fingers blistered, scrubbed until her knees bruised, and worked until her breath fogged in the cold morning air drifting through shattered glass. There were moments of triumph. The first light bulb that flickered back to life. The first faucet that ran without turning the water brown. The first night Eli slept without coughing. And moments of fear. A section of floor that nearly gave way beneath her weight. A nest of copperhead snakes hidden behind a radiator. A sound in the walls that definitely wasn't the wind. But beneath it all, something else pulsed through the building. A feeling she couldn't name. A strange hum. A coldness in some hallways and not others. A whisper of airflow where there shouldn't be any. Then she noticed the elevator. It stood in the center of the lobby like a monument to a different time. Art Deco doors, tarnished but still beautiful. Lena wiped away dirt from the button panel, revealing numbers dulled by age. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And beneath the grime she saw it, a sixth button, painted over, faded but unmistakable. She leaned closer. Someone had intentionally covered it with thick beige paint, the kind used by maintenance crews who want to erase something from sight. But the outline remained, a subtle, stubborn truth. There had been a sixth floor. Maybe there still was. Curiosity tugged at her, but life didn't leave room for mysteries yet. She had wiring to redo, insulation to replace, rooms to clear so they could move out of. The bitter cold second floor. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that the Riverside Grand was more than a decaying building. It felt curated, like parts of it had been untouched by the ruins swallowing everything else. A week later, while clearing debris near the laundry chute, she found a narrow metal door half hidden behind a sagging shelf. It looked like an access door, thin, industrial, stamped with peeling red letters, service stair, authorized personnel only. The kind of door most people walked past without noticing. But Lena noticed everything now. Her survival depended on it. She pushed. It didn't budge. Chains, thick ones, wrapped across the inside. Someone, decades ago, had locked this door with an urgency that didn't match the casual decay of the rest of the hotel. And suddenly, the unanswered questions sharpened. Why paint over an elevator button? Why chain a stairwell inside an abandoned building? What were they trying to hide? And why did it feel like it was still alive? As she stood in the dim hallway, listening to the faint, unnatural hum from somewhere above, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever was on that hidden floor wasn't just part of the building's past, it was part of her future. For days, Lena told herself she didn't have time to care about that locked service stairwell. She had bigger problems, like the boiler that kept shutting down, the mold bloom in room 214, and the fact that her son's inhaler refills were now 2 weeks past due. Mystery floors didn't fix real life. Mystery floors didn't keep your child breathing at night. But the human mind is strange. When life is unbearable below, curiosity pulls you upward. Every night, as she lay awake listening to Eli's uneven breaths, she saw the image of that painted-over elevator button glowing faintly in the dark. Every time the building groaned or the lights flickered in unison, too deliberate to be random, she felt a presence above her. Not a ghost, not a monster, but a truth. Something deliberately hidden, deliberately preserved. By the 10th sunrise, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She stood before the chained door with a borrowed crowbar, a pair of bolt cutters from a neighbor who owed her a favor, and a knot of fear in her stomach. The chains weren't store-bought. They were industrial, thick, heavy, the kind you'd use to secure construction sites or shipping crates. Whoever locked this door had wanted it sealed for a long, long time. The first cut took every ounce of strength she had. The metal hissed, then snapped with a harsh, echoing crack that made her heart race. Dust drifted from the ceiling as if the building exhaled in response. The second chain was harder. Her hands slipped, her palms burned, sweat rolled down her spine despite the cold. Halfway through, she nearly gave up, until she heard Eli coughing from the floor below, a raw, rattling cough that reminded her why she bought this place in the first place. Strength comes from strange places. Hers came from love. The second chain snapped. The lock fell away. And for the first time in 4 decades, the door creaked open. The air that drifted out wasn't stale or rotten. It was cool, filtered, almost sterile, the way hospital corridors smell before dawn. Her flashlight beam swept across narrow service stairs leading up into darkness, but not the kind of darkness she knew in the rest of the hotel. This felt controlled, contained. She climbed slowly. Each step groaned beneath her weight, but every few stairs she felt a subtle vibration, like the hum of machinery behind the walls. Machines shouldn't be running. The hotel had been abandoned since the Reagan era, yet something was still alive up there. At the top of the staircase she found another door, metal, reinforced. But this one was unlocked, as if the first set of chains had been the only barrier anyone cared about. She pushed. The moment the door opened, her breath caught in her throat, because she wasn't staring into an abandoned floor. She was staring into a time capsule. The hallway looked untouched, no dust, no mold, no decay. The wallpaper from the 1940s still clung perfectly to the walls, its gold patterns, shimmering under dim, softly humming lights. The carpet was plush beneath her feet, impossibly clean, as if someone vacuumed it minutes ago. Even the air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, not ruin. Her light drifted toward the end of the hallway where a set of double doors stood open, leading into a vast penthouse suite. She stepped forward, heart pounding. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted, cooler, controlled, preserved. Rows of dehumidifiers and air filtration units blinked silently in the corners. The wiring was meticulous, separate from the rest of the hotel's electrical skeleton. Someone had spent real money, real expertise, making sure this place stayed frozen in time. But why? Her flashlight swept across the penthouse walls, and she froze. Frames, dozens of them, mounted behind glass, each case illuminated by soft museum lighting, still glowing after 40 years. Paintings, large, small, impressionist, classical, lined every wall. Sculptures sat on pedestals, preserved in protective enclosures. Everything was arranged with precision, care, intention. This wasn't neglect. This was a vault, a secret vault. As Lena stepped deeper into the room, one question echoed louder than the hum of the machines. What was worth protecting so desperately that someone had sealed off an entire floor and kept it alive for 40 years? The answer waited in the next room, and it would shake her to her core. The letter was the only thing in the penthouse coated in dust. It lay on a mahogany desk in the center of the room, sealed in a yellowing envelope so brittle it looked like it would dissolve under her fingertips. Everything else had been preserved with meticulous care. Every painting, every sculpture, every inch of the climate-controlled suite. But the envelope had been left for time to touch, as if the writer wanted it to age naturally, honestly, while the art around it remained untouched by the years. Her hands trembled as she slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside was a neatly folded stack of hotel stationery, thick ivory paper stamped with the Riverside Grand logo from another era. The first line stopped her breath. "If you are reading this, it means my fear has finally lost its grip." The signature at the bottom would later send shockwaves through art historians and federal investigators alike. But in that moment, it was just a name she'd never heard. Alexander Weiss. A man who called himself a coward, a thief, and, most painfully, an unwilling witness to one of the darkest chapters of human history. The letter unfolded like a confession, whispered across 4 decades. Weiss wrote about a past he'd tried to outrun. A life that began in post-war Europe, where he was hired by private dealers, some wealthy American collectors, some former collaborators, some simply opportunists, to transport artwork taken during the Nazi era, paintings ripped from the walls of Jewish homes, sculptures seized from galleries owned by families forced onto trains, entire collections stolen under the guise of law. He described the moment his conscience broke. A little girl's name on the back of a watercolor, a family portrait with the faces slashed out, an old man begging in a displaced persons camp, holding nothing but a photograph of a landscape stolen from his home. He couldn't return the art. The men he worked for weren't the kind you crossed and survived, but he refused to deliver it too. So, he vanished, changed his name, bought the top floor of the Riverside Grand under a false identity, and turned it into a vault powered by an independent electrical line and funded through a quiet overseas trust. "I preserved what I could," he wrote, "not out of bravery, but out of guilt. I wanted to return it all, but fear kept me a prisoner, so I've left it for someone better than me, someone who will do what I could not." Lena felt something inside her tighten. She had come into this building searching for a home, not a legacy. She'd wanted safety, not responsibility. And yet, here she was, holding the truth about treasures lost since World War II, art once cataloged as missing, destroyed, or swallowed by black market circuits. Art that belonged to families who had already lost too much. A thick ledger sat beneath the letter. She opened it. Every page held documentation, names, family histories, photos of living rooms in Naur, Vienna, Antwerp, Krakow, notes about which families perished, which ones fled, which ones might still have descendants somewhere in the world. Some entries included dates of deportation. Some listed ship survivors boarded to reach New York. Some listed no survivors at all. The weight of it hit her like a physical force. This wasn't just art. This was memory, identity, entire lives stitched into brushstrokes. And Lena, exhausted, broke, overwhelmed Lena, was suddenly holding a key to history. She looked around the penthouse, at the glowing lights, the hum of machines guarding each artifact, the care of a man who tried to repent quietly in the shadows. She should have felt awe, but what she felt was something closer to dread. Because with every artifact she touched, she felt the same unspoken question tightening around her. What do you do when you're handed someone else's unfinished justice? For Lena, the answer wouldn't come easily, or immediately. Because what lay ahead wasn't just a moral choice. It was a cliff she would have to walk toward with nothing but conscience to guide her. And that's where the real conflict begins. For most people, moral choices happen in comfort, around dinner tables, in classrooms, in conversations where consequences are theoretical. But for Lena Morales, morality had never been theoretical. It lived in the space between her son's next breath and the pharmacy bill she couldn't pay. It lived in the quiet terror of waking up every morning, wondering if today would be the day someone decided she was unfit to raise her own child simply because she was poor. And now, standing in a penthouse filled with paintings worth more than every paycheck she'd earned in her entire life combined, morality had never felt heavier. She ran her fingers along the edge of a gilded frame. Experts would later estimate the piece at $12 million. 12 million, an amount so distant from her reality it may as well have been a number printed in a novel. With one painting, she could wipe out every medical bill. She could hire specialists for Eli. She could insulate the entire hotel. She could breathe. Just one painting, one, and no one would need to know. That thought haunted her like a whisper in a locked room. Because poverty does something cruel to the mind. It forces you to measure everything against survival. It turns every right thing into a luxury. It makes ethics feel like something rich people can afford. And when Lena stared at the art around her, treasures stolen from families who had suffered horrors she could barely imagine, she felt herself breaking under the weight of two worlds colliding. Every choice had a cost. She knew what justice demanded. She knew these paintings belonged to families who had lost not just wealth, but children, parents, lives. She had read enough entries in the ledger to know some of those families never left the camps. Returning these pieces wouldn't undo their tragedies, but it would restore something. A name, a memory, a thread back to their story. But what about her child's story? That night, she lay awake listening to Eli wheeze softly in his sleep, the way he always did when dust drifted through the old ventilation system. She placed her hand on his back, feeling each strained rise and fall. Poverty doesn't whisper in the dark. It screams, it gnaws, it tells you that the world is unfair and always will be. And for the first time, Lena wondered if she was a fool for wanting to do the right thing. The next day didn't make the choice easier. A handyman, one of the tenants from the motel they'd once lived in, stopped by after hearing she'd bought the hotel. He looked around, smirked, and said, "You know, if you ever need quick cash, I know a guy who buys art, doesn't ask questions. One piece could set you up for life." He wasn't threatening her. He thought he was helping. Another neighbor, an older woman who had seen the inside of poverty for decades, said gently, "Sweetheart, rich people write books about morals. People like us, we just try to survive." Even the building seemed to push her toward temptation. Every corner reminded her how much still needed to be fixed. Exposed wires, collapsing beams, the smell of mold woven deep into the wallpaper. She could spend her life patching holes, or she could sell one painting and repair everything at once. But the ledger wouldn't let her rest. Families, real families, had once hung these paintings over dinner tables, above cribs, beside pianos. They had lived with these pieces the way people live with stories passed down through generations. These weren't investments. They were fingerprints, echoes, fragments of lives stolen by men who believed they had the right to take everything. And now, through some impossible twist of fate, Lena, broke, invisible, unwanted by the world, was the one standing at the center of that history. By dawn, she knew what she had to do, not because she was a saint, not because she wasn't tempted, but because she understood something poverty had never been able to take from her, the quiet knowledge that doing the right thing might not save you, but it saves who you become. She picked up the phone with a shaking hand and dialed the number for the nearest Holocaust art restitution office. Her voice cracked as she said, I think I found something important, something that needs to go back." She didn't know that call would unleash a chain reaction far bigger than she imagined. She didn't know the weight of what she was stepping into. She didn't know that doing the right thing could cost her more than she'd ever lost and give her more than she'd ever hoped to find. What she did know was simple. Justice had waited long enough. When Lena hung up the phone, the world was still quiet. Eli slept in the next room, the pipes rattled the way they always did at dawn, and the Riverside Grand creaked like a ship settling deeper into water it had been sinking into for decades. For a moment, nothing felt different. She almost believed the call would drift into some distant inbox, glanced at, maybe ignored, maybe handled slowly by a caseworker with a stack of files taller than her. But by noon, everything changed. It started with a knock, not the polite kind, but the loud, urgent rhythm of authority. When Lena opened the door, 3 people stood outside. A representative from the Holocaust Art Restitution Office, a federal agent, and an art historian who looked like she hadn't slept in days. They had folders, badges, and the tense posture of people who believed they were walking into something larger than they could yet understand. Within hours, the hotel transformed from a forgotten ruin into a sealed perimeter. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance. Government vehicles lined the street. Photographers arrived, documenting every step through the hotel as if each stair hid a century-old secret, which, in truth, it did. The penthouse, once silent and preserved, filled with gloved hands, hushed tones, and the clicking of cameras capturing artwork long thought lost to history. But not everyone welcomed the discovery. News travels differently in small towns. It doesn't spread. It ripples. By sunset, locals gathered outside the hotel, murmuring, speculating, judging. Some came out of genuine curiosity, others out of resentment. People who had ignored Lena the week before now whispered her name with suspicion. Why is the FBI here? What did she get herself into? You don't find stuff like that without being involved. A man who owned several rental properties muttered loudly at the coffee shop across the street. If she thinks she's getting rewarded, she's dreaming. That building should belong to the city now. It's evidence. Even worse were the online comments. The first article hit local news the next day. Single mother finds hidden art cache in abandoned hotel. It should have been heroic. Instead, the internet tore her apart. Probably staged. She's lying. People like her don't stumble on masterpieces, they steal them. If my kid was sick, I'd sell a painting and shut up about it. Bet she already did. Lena stopped reading after that. Meanwhile, the investigation intensified. Every room in the penthouse had to be cataloged, every item scanned and documented. Agents interviewed her repeatedly, kindly, but thoroughly, as if waiting for her story to crack. And the more officials filled the building, the more unsafe she felt. Not because of them, but because of what might be taken next. The hotel, her home. What if the city decided it wasn't hers anymore? What if the building, tied to an international art theft case, was seized under some law she didn't understand? She hadn't read the fine print of the auction contract. She hadn't known she was buying a vault of stolen art. She hadn't known anything. One night, after hours of questioning, she stood alone in the dim lobby and felt the weight of every fear she'd carried for years. Poverty had always threatened to take from her, but now justice threatened to take too. She wondered if doing the right thing had been a mistake, if she had walked blindly into the kind of trouble that swallows people like her without remorse. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the historians, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled tight into a bun, approached her softly. "You did the right thing," she said, placing a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. "And I promise, even when the world doesn't make it easy, the right thing has a way of finding its way back." Her voice trembled as she added, "But yes, there will be consequences." And there were. Because the discovery didn't just bring experts and agents, it attracted powerful eyes, wealthy families, and foundations with long memories. It would also bring conflict, opportunity, and decisions Lena had never imagined having to make. What began as a call to return stolen art was about to transform into a battle over the future of the Riverside Grand itself. The investigation ended, but the ripple effects had only begun. Over the next few weeks, the Riverside Grand became a magnet, first for experts, then for journalists, and finally for the families whose lives had been fractured by the theft of their cultural identity. They didn't all arrive at once. They arrived slowly, cautiously, each carrying a piece of the past carefully wrapped in their voices. One woman, frail, elegant, her fingers trembling as if holding invisible memories, stood in the penthouse and whispered, "My grandfather painted by this window." A man in his 40s cried quietly as he traced the outline of a painting he had only ever seen in old family photographs. Sisters from New York clutched each other tightly when they recognized their family name written in the ledger's margins. For a moment, the penthouse wasn't a vault. It was a gathering place for long-lost histories finally returned home. Yet, even as gratitude filled the space, conflict simmered just below the surface. City officials held meetings behind closed doors. Lawyers talked about ownership, liability, and historic designation. Developers circled the building like vultures, offering to restore it properly if given control. And meanwhile, the town itself became divided. Some people believing Lena should be rewarded, others believing the building never should have been in her hands to begin with. Then came the turning point. A black SUV pulled up to the Riverside Grand one chilly morning, and out stepped Daniel Roth, the grandson of one of the families whose stolen artwork had been preserved upstairs. He wasn't glamorous. He wasn't intimidating. He wore jeans, a knit sweater, and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. But Lena recognized him immediately from a documentary Eli once watched about Holocaust heirs fighting to reclaim their ancestral art. He walked through the lobby slowly, respectfully, almost reverently. And when he reached Lena, he extended a hand and said quietly, "You returned a piece of my family to me. I'd like to return something to yours." It wasn't money. At least, not directly. It was partnership. Daniel explained that his foundation, created decades earlier to rebuild communities devastated by displacement, had funds specifically dedicated to projects that preserved memory while uplifting the living. The Riverside Grand, he said, wasn't just a building. It was a crossroads of history and future, exactly the kind of place his foundation existed to restore. He offered full funding to renovate the hotel, new electrical systems, new plumbing, safe insulation, structural reinforcement, accessibility upgrades, and modern essentials. In return, he asked only for one thing: permission to turn the penthouse into a permanent exhibit, honoring the stolen art, the families it belonged to, and the man who hid it away, hoping one day justice would find it. But the city pushed back. Developers argued they could turn the East Hotel into a profitable boutique space, bringing tourists and tax revenue. The mayor wanted a commercial district revival. Local business owners worried that low-income housing would drag property values down. And some residents whispered that Lena had no business deciding the future of such an important building. Meetings grew heated. Accusations flew. Headlines multiplied. Through it all, Lena felt small again, like the girl who had moved through foster homes with nothing but a duffel bag. But then she remembered the families who had stood in that penthouse with tears in their eyes. She remembered the art historian's hand on her shoulder. She remembered Eli's face the night she told him that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. And so, she fought. Not with anger, but with truth. Not with power, but with purpose. She spoke at town halls. She shared the stories from the ledger. She reminded her community that the Riverside Grand had been dying long before she arrived, that it could be a symbol of healing instead of decay, that it could serve the people who needed it most instead of becoming another monument to wealth. When Daniel stood beside her at the final meeting, a quiet grief in his voice as he talked about what was stolen from his family, something shifted. The room softened, the arguments eased, and slowly support grew. The city approved the partnership. Renovations began within weeks. Walls came down. New beams went up. Volunteers from the community, retirees, teenagers, local workers, showed up with tool belts and paintbrushes. The Riverside Grand, once collapsing, breathed again and transformed into something it had never been before, a living place of memory, justice, and second chances. But the biggest transformation wasn't the building. It was what happened to the people inside it, especially Lena and her son. 5 years is a strange amount of time. Long enough for a child to grow out of shoes and into dreams, long enough for a forgotten building to become a heartbeat, long enough for a single choice, made by a woman who once believed she had nothing, to ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted. By the 5th anniversary of the discovery, the Riverside Grand didn't resemble the ghost it once was. Its windows shone with warm light at dusk. Its restored Art Deco facade glimmered like it did in black and white postcards from the 1940s. People didn't whisper about it anymore. They pointed, smiled, and said, "That place changed this town." Inside, life pulsed through every floor. 40 families now lived in safe, affordable apartments. Single parents, retirees, veterans, young adults aging out of foster care who once faced the same unstable future Lena did. Hallways that once echoed with emptiness now played the sounds of kids running, neighbors laughing, and pots simmering in shared kitchens. On the 2nd floor, a daycare buzzed with tiny voices and finger paints. On the 3rd, adults worked toward GEDs, learned English, or took free computer classes run by volunteers. And every evening, a familiar figure walked through those hallways carrying a clipboard, greeting people by name. Lena Morales had become the quiet spine of this place, someone who had once been broken by life, but now held up an entire community. Her son, Eli, was 14 now, taller, healthier, confident. His asthma was under control with consistent medical care from the community clinic built next door, funded by the same foundation that restored the hotel. He spent afternoons tutoring younger kids or volunteering in the Penthouse Museum, where he told visitors the story of his mom with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had gone from a boy struggling to breathe in a motel bed to a teenager planning to become a doctor. But the heart of the building, the part that drew visitors from across the country, was still the Penthouse. What was once a sealed vault was now a museum dedicated to stolen art, lost families, and the complicated legacy of one man's fear and repentance. The original pieces had long been returned to their rightful descendants, but the space now held digital recreations, archival documents, photographs, survivor testimonies, and interactive exhibits curated with care. School buses lined the street every weekend. Veterans groups visited. Synagogues and churches brought members to learn. Families wandered quietly through the rooms, holding hands and whispering to their children about the cost of silence and the courage of remembering. One wall in the exhibit was dedicated to Lena's decision, a single panel titled, "The Call That Returned the Light." It wasn't grandiose. It didn't glorify her. It simply told the truth, that sometimes history changes not because of wealth or power, but because one person, tired, scared, unseen, chooses to do what is right even when no one is watching. And the town itself had transformed around the hotel. New storefronts opened within walking distance. A cafe reclaimed an empty corner. A small bookstore appeared across the street. The city's unemployment rate dropped. People who had once planned to leave now stayed. People who had once stayed out of resignation now felt proud. Yet of all the changes, the most profound was something harder to see, something woven into the daily rhythm of the place. It was hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind you whisper to yourself in the dark, but the kind you see in children doing homework in the lobby, in neighbors helping each other carry groceries, in elders teaching cooking classes from their cultures, in immigrants sharing stories that make the world feel bigger. All of it, every new life, every repaired wall, every lesson taught, every breath Eli took without pain, had come from one impossible decision made in the quiet of a decaying penthouse. One choice had echoed out like a stone dropped in still water, touching people Lena would never meet, places she would never see, futures she couldn't imagine. And now, 5 years later, standing in the lobby beneath the restored chandelier, she could finally feel it. The belonging she had chased her entire life, a home not just built, but shared. But the story wasn't over yet. Because the true measure of a choice isn't just what it changes, it's what it asks of the world watching. 5 years after that first desperate bid, the Riverside Grand stands as proof that one person, one ordinary, exhausted, nearly broken person, can bend the arc of history with nothing but a phone call and a trembling sense of right and wrong. But the real question isn't what Lena did. The question is what we would do if placed in her shoes. It's easy to admire her now when the hotel glows with warm lights and community laughter. It's easy to say we'd choose justice when justice is wrapped in applause and news headlines and museum plaques. But that's not where her decision was made. Her choice was born in the silence of poverty, in the cold echo of an empty building, with a sick child sleeping beneath a threadbare blanket. Her choice happened when she had every reason to look the other way, and no safety net to catch her if she fell. It's worth asking ourselves honestly, what do we value when no one is watching? Who do we become when we stand at the intersection of survival and integrity? And what stories will our children inherit from the choices we make today? Because the truth is, most of us will never find a vault of stolen art or hold history in our hands. But every day, we face smaller crossroads that shape who we are, returning a lost wallet when rent is due, telling the truth when lying would be easier, refusing to exploit someone who has less power, speaking up when silence would protect us. These may not make the news, but they make a life. They make a legacy, and they ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. Lena's story reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing the right thing even when you're terrified of what it might cost. It reminds us that justice isn't abstract. It's personal, messy, and sometimes lonely. And it reminds us that goodness, real goodness, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's ordinary. It's built in the moments when we think no one will notice. So as you sit with this story, I invite you to ask yourself, if you found something precious, something powerful, would you hold on to it for yourself? Or would you return it to the world, knowing you may never be rewarded for doing so? And if Lena's story moved you today, if it stirred something in you, or reminded you of the kind of person you hope to become, then I ask you to take one small step right now. It costs nothing, but it means everything for creators who bring stories like this into the world. Like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in doing the right thing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because there are more stories out there about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, and I'd love to share those journeys with you. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for remembering that every choice, no matter how small, can be a stone dropped into still water. We never know how far the ripples will reach. Comment below. What choice would you have made?